And welcome back to the show. The Gray Panthers NYC is an organization committed to combating ageism and achieving social justice through intergenerational advocacy. Now, they work to create a humane society that puts the needs of people over profits, responsibility over power, and democracy over institutions. The organization believes civic partnership and responsibility are fundamental to achieving social and economic justice as well as peace. Joining us to share more is the president of Gray Panthers NYC, Jack Kupferman. And Jack, glad to have you.
I'm so grateful to be able to speak with you, Daren.
Yeah, I'm glad to talk to you too. And you do a lot in the area of advocacy. But before we get into the area of advocacy, just for our viewers, I gave them a little bit of background, but sure, take us through a little bit more about your organization.
You know, Gray Panthers has been around for a while. Now, what we've done over the course of years, some people may remember the name Maggie Kuhn. She had been one of the most important activists of the 20th century. And what she had done then and what she does is still relevant today. It's like nothing has, even though so much has changed, not that much has changed. She was at the forefront of the anti-war movement, all of the progressive movements, and highlighted the importance of intergenerational advocacy and making sure that the direct actions had an effect on the country and the world. Now, Gray Panthers continues in that realm and has done a great deal over the course of years. In the more recently, the past couple of years, we've been focusing on different aspects of ageism. And obviously, COVID is the issue of the moment. And within that, we've been focusing on the grief and the difficulties of long-term care and COVID and the tsunami of deaths. You know, and it continues to go on today with Omicron. So one of the items that we did most recently in last year, we had a very successful documentary highlighting the intersection of grief, COVID, death, and bringing to the fore for just about everybody, because no one is not affected. And this, luckily we won an award for our documentary, and it's kind of spurred a lot of discussion. We'd encourage you to look at the documentary, which is on our YouTube channel, which is Gray Panthers NYC, and it's honoring nursing home lives lost.
Right.
Now,
and I want to
go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, because I wanted to say that a lot of the work that you do when you talk about ageism and really looking at those who've been affected in advocacy. I wanted to talk for a moment about how you approach that, because you're very intentional in what you do. And also, one of the things that I wanted to get at was how you really have said in your model that you're really about dealing with the person in as much as looking at their age. And I want you to speak to that.
Okay, well, you know, ageism, it cuts across generations. Ageism it is primarily with regard to older people, but younger people and people of younger generations feel as though they are not addressed, their concerns are not addressed because of their age. And we expect to link those two. And we've been pretty successful in that in a number of ways. And we look at that as an essential partnership. Both generations have something to give, and they do. The older people may have the wisdom and the backgrounds. The younger people have the creativity, the enthusiasm, and today the technological skills. So those are two of the things that we link together. Now, in terms of let's look at the issue of long-term care. Long-term care is not an issue of old people. It's an issue for you and for your children. And long-term care, almost by definition, is ageism, because ageism is, one way to look at it is it's just invisibility. People are not seen. The concerns are not addressed. It is not possible for people who are 20 years of age to know what it's like to be 70. And yet, everybody who's 20, or almost everybody, wants to be 70. How are we going to address those things? So it's not about the generation, each generation, their concerns. It's about looking at it almost as a whole with segments. In terms of ageism, one of the things that we've been doing in terms of the intergenerational advocacy is we have a very successful internship program where we get some of the most talented young students from around the country to intern with us, and without fail, as they work with us, they tell me and they tell us that we didn't understand how important the concerns of older people are and how pervasive ageism is in everyday life. And they take this information and this style back to their colleges, back to their families, back to their communities. And they have become committed advocates as well. Now, as I was mentioning a little earlier, one of our current initiatives is about long-term care. And we've been doing, in addition to the documentary, we've had a monthly webinar series that we call Transformation Tuesdays to highlight the important and under-acknowledged aspects of long-term care reform and transformation. We just did one the other day, just yesterday, on the nursing home workforce, change in the public interest. Now, when we're talking about the various isms in the world, this one is the intersection, represents the intersection of racism, sexism, ageism, income inequality. And really, I'm a little skeptical that a whole lot of people care. It's important for us and everybody who's listening today to understand that this is an issue that affects all of us. Nursing home workers, the nursing home workforce, as well as the long-term care workforce, they do God's work. And not only are they underpaid, but the conditions are awful. They risk their lives on a daily basis to do incredibly hard work to help you and me and our loved ones. And the compensation, inadequate. Compensation for long-term care workers is often less than it is for fast food workers. In Yiddish, they say that's a shanda, a terrible thing. Now, the scope of this is enormous. There are tens of thousands of workers just in the state of New York that are affected by this. And part of what we want to do is we want to bring this issue to the fore. This is just one of the many issues that we've been talking about through the Transformation Tuesday series. And this is ageism, sexism, racism, income inequality. Let's look at the workforce themselves. Who are these people? Generally women, generally people of color, generally not particularly financially secure. They have their own children, they have their own problems, and this is damn hard work. and it's the labor of love. There's a number of initiatives. Governor Hochul is addressing some of this, but not in a concrete way, in a complete way. And we need to focus on that.
Can I jump in and ask a question about, when we look, most of us are dealing in New York City with this emerging housing market, and ageism, I know affects the housing in terms of people wanting to know how and when they're going to live, and particularly here in the broader Bronx. And I want you to also, before we get out of here, make sure you highlight some of the things that are happening, particularly, close here to the Bronx as well. But talk to us about housing and how people are really concerned about this particular issue.
Well, in housing, with regard to whether it be multi-generational housing, in New York City, the issue of housing always a major issue, whether it's privately owned or rental. There is never enough, and whether it's a quote unquote affordable housing, first of all, what does affordable housing mean? It's usually out of the range of many people, and yet people are able to survive. In multi-generational households, particularly in the Bronx, are susceptible to COVID and to other similar diseases and plagues. The close quarters do not make it healthier for people. Access to housing, if anybody has ever looked for an apartment or a house in New York City, this is not an easy process, and the prices are going up everywhere, including in the Bronx. Despite the fact that there's been some improvement in the housing stock, certainly not enough, and certainly not enough for older people. When I had been working with in various in government, there was always such a surge of interest for affordable housing for seniors, and yet it just didn't exist. The waiting lists for these things are many years long, and the conditions in their people's current apartments deteriorate, and they're not always properly maintained. I don't know how we're going to rectify these concerns. This has been an eternal problem. Now, I also wanted to turn to some of the other things that we've been doing in the Bronx, that particularly during COVID. We highlighted a couple of families who were challenged during the lockdown and when the children were at home, and you saw this whole thing so clearly. The whole family was in the apartment at the same time, trying to study and work, and the stresses that were on. We did a couple of videos on that score. Also in the Bronx, because of the wave of death from COVID, and we wanted to acknowledge that the people behind these closed doors, behind these facilities, which are sometimes a prison. So what we did is that we did in nursing homes, what we did is that we were able to deliver flowers just to bring a moment of joy to these people. Another thing that we did in the Bronx, just to alleviate a little bit of the stress, there's the grandparent family apartments in the Bronx, which is the only place as I understand, in the country where it's specifically for grandparents taking care of grandchildren. We sponsored a pizza day where we just brought in X number of pizzas for the entire building. So those are just some of the things that we have done in the Bronx, and that we want to build our relationship with Bronx residents, to bring Bronx people, Bronx concerns into the advocacy for ageism, into the advocacy for progressive causes, to work with us to do direct actions, and to work with legislators and other policymakers throughout the borough, as well as throughout the city and the country. That's just one aspect of what we've done.
Can I jump in and ask a question about volunteering, because we're running short on time, but I do want to have the opportunity to allow those persons who may want to assist. And you talked about those who've worked. If a person is interested in volunteering, how can that occur?
On our website, which is greypanthersnyc.org, that's greypanthersnyc.org, and I want everybody to note that website needs an overhaul, and we're in the process of doing that now. There is a volunteer recruitment form that we would encourage you to use. You can also call me directly at 917-535-0457, 917-535-0457. And we would encourage as many people to join us as you would like. That's one way to do this. There's so much that we've been involved in. We've been involved in Social Security advocacy. We are planning a number of issues, a number of projects with regard to advocacy for long-term care, particularly focusing on ageism and in all communities, confronting systemic discriminations, and a whole host of other things. And there's just so much that we can talk about, and I don't know, I'm just excited to be here, and I'm hoping that something of what we're doing will make an impact on the people who are listening.
Definitely, I believe that people are listening, and when you talk about impact, yes, it's the organization is making an impact, as evidenced by, I think, what you talked about earlier, young people having the opportunity to have that experience of those who know about what ageism really is, and going back into their own culture and being able to do that. Do you find that the intergenerational approach is really one of the ways to really combat this?
Absolutely. In terms of combating, first of all, combating ageism, there are two components to that. One is education, to identify that this is an issue and how does it manifest itself. And secondly is familiarity. People of different generations, as they get together, not so much as the kumbaya, it's really nice to sit down and have tea. That's nice. But when they're working together side by side, both sides benefit from that. And even more importantly, the two individuals are working towards a common goal. This is what we need to do in today's society, to work together towards a common goal. And with the heart and the good heart that so many of us have, that's been almost overshadowed by the difficulties that we're facing in today's world.
Well, Jack, we got to leave it there. And thank you so much for joining us and sharing. And I know that there's a great deal of work to be done, but certainly you got boots on the ground, and want to thank you for the work that you're doing, and also exposing others to the issue of ageism. Thanks a lot for being with us, Jack Kupferman.
Thank you so much for having me.
All righty, we want you to stay with us here on the Social Justice Forums. We'll be right back right after this.